Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope you're doing well. It was the 25th of May 2005. The venue, Istanbul Ataturk Stadium. Two of the heavyweights of world football. One punching well above their weight, the other the obvious favorites. Halftime, I'm sitting there devastated. 3-0 down, feeling like this isn't going the way it's supposed to. Second half kicks off, and the miracle of Istanbul. 3 goals in 6 minutes, and the rest was history. I'm here today to add a little bit more on what Ashik started, on the art of storytelling. Because this is one of the most powerful things that you can use as a tool, as a tip, when you're going to be making your presentations in the forthcoming weeks. So there are 3 things I'd like to start with. Magic. Storytelling is about adding magic to your presentation. You want to give the audience those words that are going to make the hairs on their arms rise. It's going to make that person's mouth go, ha. So that is what you want to do when you want to tell a story. It is important that you think about this before you start, because the key thing is to get that attention. You know, when you talk about the attention span of an audience going up and down, so it's important that you're able to grab that by bringing in a story that makes sense. The emotion of an audience is also very important. You need to take them along with you on the journey. If you have a funny story about seeing somebody pee on stage, or it's a story about how you got embarrassed on stage, all of these emotions play an important part. So when you're telling your story, make sure you're connecting with your audience in terms of their emotions and what it is that you want to project to them as well. The important thing also about storytelling is that it allows you to bring perspective to your discussion or to the point that you want to make. If you're going to be talking about a technical topic in your presentation in the next week, or if you're lucky enough to get to the finals, you have to understand that not everybody is going to be at your level, correct? You might be talking about a medical thing, for example, if you have that background, or you might be talking about something in marketing. I'm an accountant. I only understand numbers. In fact, even when I present, I like to talk about numbers. This is not what I normally do, but here we are. So it's important to bring a story into your presentation. It helps the audience to get the perspective of what it is that you are trying to bring to them. Okay? There are 3 key elements that you need to keep in mind when you're designing or coming up with your story. The first thing is the structure. Now, there are 3 important things in any story. The first thing is going to be an introduction. So you will lay the groundwork of what your story is about. In my case, I started out by telling you the date, the location, and the big event that it was. Once you've done the introduction, there will be an action. What happened? Suddenly it was 3-0. So you tell the audience what happened. After the introduction, after the action, you will have a grand finale. Something happens now to tie the whole story up into a nice knot for the audience to understand. If you're able to bring these 3 elements into your story, that will make sense. What happens if you don't have a structure in your story? You tend to waffle. You might end up starting with something in mind, but by the time you finish, you're nowhere near where you want it to be. So it is important to have a structure when you're telling your story. The second thing that you need to have is you need to have memorable characters. So bring in that person in your story who is going to bring the audience's attention back to you. Make them engaging. What was their motivation at the time that they are a member or a participant in your story? What were they doing? And the third thing in the structure is a plot. You need to have a very clear plot. Why exactly are you explaining the story? What is the point behind the story? So there has to be, again, a beginning and an end. Context, yes, here we go. Okay, so context matters. Three things here I'd like again you to pick away. Again, this was also alluded to earlier when Ashik was making his presentation. Understand your audience. You see, we are all here with a diverse range of ages, aren't we? We've got people who are still studying, and we've got people who are maybe carrying out their higher education in universities, and you have some people who are already working and making some money. The story will depend on the audience that you have. So you need to make sure that whatever it is that you're going to give to them ties in with their levels of understanding. Context is very important as well. Imagine we are sitting in mosque today and the Maulana is going to be talking. Do you think that he will give a happy story when there is a wafat? Or will he give a sad story when there is a kushali? Well, that always happens. But it is important. That is what I mean when we talk about the context. So we need to understand what it is that we want to portray. And finally, tailor your story accordingly. So don't always have a fixed, once you've made your plan, sometimes you may have a situation where you need to change it. So you also need to be flexible enough to adjust your story to the audience that is there, as well as to the context in which you want to make that. Finally, I have some practical tips, which are probably more important. So all the other stuff I talked about was waffle, okay? That was just a theory. So let's look at the real good stuff now. The first thing is keep it simple. If you start coming up with a very complicated story that has got 7 different characters going through 3 different emotions from the time they were born and how they went through their educational journey until the time they graduated and they met the life, the love of their life, but then they fell out and then they managed to get marriage counseling and then finally it all went well, that's too much. Okay, so keep your story simple, make it engaging. The second thing is make it relevant. So if you're going to be talking about a particular topic, try and find a story that you can actually link into the topic that you want to talk about. So again, we look at your level of expertise, what it is that you are good at. So if, for example, you are a medical doctor, then maybe you can give an example that ties it into that. I was actually looking at, Hussein, I was looking at your presentation from last year. When you started your presentation, you started talking about emergency, medicine, and somebody comes in and pressure is dropping, and that is something he knows personally. And that made it a lot easier for the audience even to connect and understand that this guy, he knows what he's talking about. Now, I'm a Liverpool fan, right? You cut me and I bleed red. Very, very bad joke. Very poor joke. All right? But because I am a Liverpool fan, that makes it very relevant, and it's something that is very close to me. So I can remember these dates. These dates stay in my life. The 25th of May 2005, Liverpool won the cup. 23rd of May 2007, I was lucky enough to get tickets and I went all the way to Athens to watch again the rematch of Liverpool and Milan. Unfortunately, we lost it that time, but I was there and these dates remain with me. So make it relevant. The third practical tip is your body language. Again, we heard this earlier. When you're making a presentation, when you're talking to someone, especially up on stage, your body language is more than 55% of the impact that you have on your audience. The words are only 7%, and the remaining percentage is the way you speak, is how you take your voice up and your voice down, your modulation, your tone. So good body language is going to be very important. When we did the masterclass and the workshop over the last couple of weeks, I also explained, you might remember that we talked about how you stand on stage and you want to have a base on your stage. And when you get comfortable, that is when you start moving around. If you are nervous on stage, okay, and you start making funny actions, when we are judging you, okay, that is what we will pick up. So we will realize whether the actions that you're taking on stage are natural or they're not. So it's very important. Do you guys remember, those of you that were in the masterclass, the rest pose that we talked about? You put your feet grounded, you put your hands around your belly button, and don't grip it very tight, but you have a very loose one hand on top of the other. Ashik had another method where he keeps his hands like this, right? And this is actually, there is some research, or mystical research taken that says this makes the flow of energy in your body better to get the creative juices flowing. Right? It works for him. right? So you need to be natural, but maintain that good body language when you're telling a story as well. Great stuff. Humor. Bring in the humor in your stories. Without humor, you will lose the audience and you will lose the judges. So it is very important to identify a good joke to bring into your story. Now be careful with humor as well, because you again want to look at the type of audience that you have, the story that you're telling. Make the humor general, PG at most. Don't go overboard with it, right? So make it palatable to the audience that is there. Be natural. Speak from your heart. At the end of the day, as judges as well, we want to see you when you're speaking up there, who you are as an individual. And that'll come out when you're telling your story. So if you're natural and you're speaking from the heart and you're talking about you being yourself when you're making that presentation, it'll come out. The nervousness will also go away when you're being yourself. So this actually has a double effect for you. And the final thing is bringing in your personal experiences. When you're able to share a story about something that you personally went through, it has a completely different impact on the audience, because the audience will realize that, again, this is somebody who's gone through this. And it makes a much bigger connection with your audience rather than relying on something that you've read from somewhere. Okay? So with those few tips, I would strongly encourage you that as you start preparing for your presentation next week, make sure you put in a story in there just to grab our attention, and then we'll see how it goes. Mine is a short session. Thank you very much.